Welcome, everyone. My name is Noor. I'm one of the show hosts for Raw Talk Podcast for Season 5. I'm really excited to be facilitating today's discussion on science communication careers. We have two incredible science communicators with us today, Farah, Qaiser, and Ki-Youn Kim. We'll have about 30 to 40 minutes of a fireside chat and then about 10 to 15 minutes for questions for the audience to ask. So be sure to type them out in the chat box. So I'll let the guests introduce themselves. Farah, why don't we start with you?
Hi everyone, my name's Farah Qaiser. I'm a genomics researcher and a science communicator. I'm going to try to keep this short, but I do wear a couple of hats, which makes it confusing for folks, I think. I'm a genomics researcher at the University Health Network's Epilepsy Genetics Clinic. I'm also doing research into best practices for federal science communication at Evidence for Democracy. And in my spare-ish time, I'm also teaching some workshops in a science communication toolbox program for researchers at NSERC Permafrostnet. In the past, I've written about science for media outlets. I've co-founded the Toronto Science Policy Network, and I'm super excited to share the stage with Ki-Youn today.
Great, Ki-Youn.
Everyone, I'm Ki-Youn. I'll also try to keep mine really short too. I'm currently the Community Development Coordinator at the Chemical Institute of Canada. And during my free time, I'm a board director on the Science Writers and Communicators of Canada. So if you have any questions about that organization, I'd be happy to answer. And on top of that, I'm also the 50th anniversary chair for the SWCC for this year. And I also provide lectures and workshops for different universities and organizations, depending on what their needs are. And you might have seen me on Twitter because I usually tweet on Sundays under hashtags #IcomSunday.
Great, thank you both. I'm sure that we'll have some really incredible insights for today. Before we dive into how you could build a career in science communication, a lot of our audience members might be new to this field. So I'm wondering if we can just get like a really brief summary of what science communication really is and what counts as science communication work. So Ki-Youn, do you want to start us off with this one?
Yeah, sure. So this was something that even like my peers and I struggle with defining, because depending on where you're coming from, the definition will often be different. So combining both what academia defines it as and what people who practice it in the field, as I've combined it to define it as, it's about making science information accessible to different audiences. And it doesn't matter what kind of medium you're using, because there are so many different ways to do this, to make science accessible to different people.
That's a really great summary. Farah, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, Ki-Youn completed a master's in science communication at Laurentian University, so whatever Ki-Youn says totally works. The only thing I'm going to add is that science communication really does look different for a lot of people. You might be more into writing, and perhaps you're writing for newspapers, perhaps you're blogging, perhaps you're writing for lay audiences in like very specific niches. Maybe you're doing podcasts, maybe you're doing sock puppets. I saw someone do sock puppets at a recent Science Land. So yeah, there are a lot of different forms and mediums to science communication, and it's just so hard to kind of hone down on that one definition of what science communication is.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious to know what inspired both of you to explore science communication and get started in this career. So Farah, do you want to comment on that?
So for me, I started in science communication without actually knowing what it was. I was in my undergraduate degree at the University of Toronto. I started writing for my campus newspaper. So I was writing about a lot of different things. So sometimes it was news pieces, sometimes it was features pieces. And I ended up being elected as the features editor. As editor, I decided to kind of shake things up. I wanted to write more about science stories, and I wanted to get my writers to write more about science stories. So it's things about profiling researchers, profiling students who were doing the work, and just really exploring like the different aspects of science that were happening on campus. When I then started graduate school, I still wanted to keep writing for science, but I also wanted to get some training. So I headed off to Concordia University's Projected Futures course, where I got a crash course in science journalism. So I kept doing science writing. I started doing a bit more outreach towards youth and older adults. And I kind of noticed that the same issues kept popping up again and again. there were a lot of talks, workshops, and panels about the lack of diversity in STEM, that so much of science is locked behind paywalls, that science doesn't seem to play a role in decision making. So after a while, I think if you're in science communication for long enough, you'll see the same conversations again and again. And there are a lot of great people who are addressing these issues, but I felt like I could also do something to help. And I was particularly interested in this idea of science policy, this idea that science can help inform decision makings and that we need policy to regulate science. There weren't a lot of science policy groups around. In fact, there was none at Toronto. So that's why I ended up co-founding the Toronto Science Policy Network, where we really wanted to provide a space for researchers and students to learn and engage in science policy. And yeah, it all started off with me writing about science and then just really getting stuck in all these issues about science and wanting to help make a difference while still continuing to communicate about science.
That sounds like quite a journey. What about you, Ki-Youn?
I also kind of fell into it like many people in my community. I originally wanted to be a doctor for about 2 decades of my life, not because my parents were like, you should go be a doctor. My dad actually did say, why don't you go do something fun instead? And I was like, Dad, you're an engineer, you're being rude. So something I excelled in throughout my education was science writing. That's how I got into the science communication program. And it was something that a lot of my mentors kept telling me to pursue or consider pursuing. So I didn't get into med school like a second time. And I was like, fine, you guys just can't handle how amazing I am. That's fine. So I applied for the science communication program and I got in. And I'm just like, yeah, I guess I'll bum it out in Sudbury for a year and apply again. But I really fell in love with the field. And this was where I didn't know what science communication was until I got to this program, but I realized that there were a lot of moments in my life where I had been doing science communication and how public speaking was also something that I really enjoyed, especially in the STEM field. And what made me stay was that science communication as a field has this weird culture of bringing in the misfits who didn't feel like they quite belonged in just STEM, or they didn't feel like they quite belonged just in the social sciences. And it's like this weird overlap, this weird magical space that people come together and you feel like you belong because you're allowed to thrive in it. And I stayed because I was allowed to practice both my creativity, but also still combine it with my love of science. So if you're one of those people where you're like, I love science, but I don't know what topic specifically to pick for my master's or my PhD, like, come join us. It's a great space.
Thank you both for sharing that. I'm sure that people in the audience would find that inspiring. And both kind of mentioned that there's a variety of different platforms that you could use for science communication. So what kinds of mediums or platforms are available for someone who's interested in science communication, and how do you decide which one you want to pursue? So Ki-Youn, do you want to get that started on this?
Yeah, sure. As for deciding what medium you want to pursue, I would say that is very heavily up to the individual who is pursuing a career or maybe a hobby or a passion in science communication. Okay, I don't want to overwhelm people, but like Farah said earlier, there is such a wide range of things you can go into science communication. I know that everyone here isn't really into science podcasts, so that's one of them. Video production, so you'll probably see a lot of SciComm videos on YouTube. And social media is a really popular one with the English-speaking SciComm community on a global scale. Now, this is where things get really interesting because, and I'm going to let Farah talk about science policy because that's her niche. You'll find that aside from those things, people tend to miss a lot of the other mediums, including infographics, graphic design, science, like writing. It doesn't always have to be writing stories or being a journalist. It can be anything to do with knowledge translation synthesis products. So you're making plain language products for the general public. It can also include data visualization. That is such a big thing right now. So if you love making data look beautiful, I really encourage you checking out Information is Beautiful. They have a wonderful workshop that's 6 hours, teaches you everything from basic design theory all the way to how you can rearrange your data. There's different categories and layouts for it. It's also other things that you can also pursue is exhibit design. If you love science outreach and museums and science centers, that's also another fun thing to do. And again, that also comes back to knowing how to do design and being familiar with the design theory. And if I remember correctly, there are different college programs around the world that do offer courses like this. It's a little tricky to get into science centers and exhibit designs, but it's also like an incredible amount of fun. What else is there? Public speaking is a huge one too. If you also really like slide deck design, I've also done coaching with both grad students and with medical professionals on how to design a talk. And there's also, no, I think that's all I can think of off the top of my head right now. Yeah, so I'm gonna let Farah add on anything.
I think Ki-Youn really covered everything. I'm gonna take science policy. Mediums. So when it comes to science policy, a lot of what it's kind of divided into two. You can either advocate for your science, perhaps on an individual level. Maybe you're writing a budget recommendation. Perhaps you're speaking with your elected representatives, whether that's at the provincial or the federal level, or maybe you're signing open letters. Then there are also people who kind of congregate together to help address science policy. So that's things like groups such as Evidence for Democracy, the Science and Policy Exchange, the Toronto and Science Policy Network. The one thing I will clarify is what science policy is. So there are two types of science policy. There's policy for science, the kind of structures that regulate science. So like, how do you decide how to fund science? Which proposals should be funded? And then there's science for policy. So how is science informing decision-making, which we've seen or not seen during this pandemic? The other part of your question, Noor, was about how do you find your niche? And there's really no one right answer for it. For me, I explored a lot of different niches and trying to figure out like what are best practices? What does this look like in Canada? What does it look like abroad? Before I kind of figured out, okay, I think I really enjoy writing. I seem to be doing well in public speaking. I really enjoy science policy and the ability to kind of address gaps, but I'm still learning. I'm still finding things that I like and I don't like. And it's going to be a journey as you kind of figure out which medium or platform you want to use.
Yeah, those are some really great tips and advice. A lot of our audience members here are trainees, either undergraduates or graduate students or already graduated. So I'm wondering if you have any advice for people who want to build their SciComm skills as trainees, whether that be training opportunities like courses, programs, initiatives, and anything else where someone can use to build their skills. So Ki-Youn, do you want to comment on that?
I can comment on it in two ways. If we're going the formal route, I would strongly recommend finding as many training opportunities as you can. So the Raw Talk, they also covered a lot of SciComm practices. The SciComm Toronto conference also went through a lot of evidence-based science communication. And this isn't to say you can't pursue a career in science communication without formal training, but it definitely saves you a lot of time and pain from learning those mistakes you could have avoided if you had someone kind of take you through those steps. As for programs in Canada, I know University of Calgary has a graduate 6-week trainee program. Laurentian was the first master's program in Canada. And I know McMaster recently just opened one up too. I don't know the details of that one too much though. And if you can afford to go abroad, I couldn't. Edinburgh also has a science communication program, and Australia is the other country that is a little more big on that. You do want to double check what kind of courses they are providing though, because a lot of the science communication programs, aside from the one in UK and Laurentian, are strictly science journalism focused. So they won't necessarily give you the widest range of science communication skills you need if you want like a very diverse career. In terms of informal training, so I mentioned a lot of skills that you need for science communication. Well, not need, but could work towards. if you're like, I don't want to go to more school, Ki-Youn, I've been in school forever, like I get that, I understand. But these are, having been in the field for a while now, these are the different skills I found were really useful that I wish, or I plan on pursuing later on when I have the money to actually pay for these certifications. Nonprofit life. So I strongly recommend people taking like some kind of design course, especially if you want to go into visual stuff. You don't have to learn how to use the Adobe Creative Suite programs, but if you're like, no, I want to make this like my real career, that is the industry standard. And there are so many resources online that you can definitely become quite good with the programs. And another thing I would recommend is like learn how to use social media effectively. Running social media on behalf of an organization is very different from running your own personal account. And the strategies that you have to use are also quite different. Right now, micro-influencer lists are like the whole rage about increasing engagement. Now, a lot of people who are in science communication will most definitely fall into the nonprofit sector. There's not a lot of money in the nonprofit sector. It's just a small amount. But one skill that keeps popping up is marketing and sponsorships, because unfortunately you need money to run events, you need money to do projects. And if you're serious about going into science communication and you want to work with nonprofits, you will have to wear multiple hats, and having the basic skills or maybe even a certification in marketing and sponsorships will take you really far, because not only can you do knowledge translation, but now you're bringing money in to be able to do knowledge translation. Like, that's great. And also reading a lot. I read a lot of books outside of work and all my volunteer things because I have to constantly update my knowledge. And because science communication is such an interdisciplinary field, it's important to read different books and studies in psychology and sometimes in economics or in like history is a big one, especially if you're looking into not the anti-vaxxer, but the vaccine hesitant groups and how we came to that point and what we need to do.
Really great advice. Farah, do you have any advice for people who are building their skills as trainees?
Yep. So I get this question. The reasons why I ended up writing a beginner's guide to science communication opportunities in Canada. I've dropped the link in there, but perhaps that Ki-Youn has mentioned. So when it comes to training, there are programs and courses that you can take. There are now kind of more emerging science communication courses across Canada. They're just like one-off courses in university. So things that like at McGill, they have a communicating science course, which is like CCOM 314. You have one-off courses like Concordia University's Projected Futures course. Concordia University has also launched a minor in science journalism, which is super exciting. So you kind of find these courses scattered across the different universities. So definitely check out your university, look at the course list or graduate level. And then another way to build these skills is to volunteer and to get your foot in the door and start practicing these skills. You do have to kind of work out that balance of when you feel like you've built your skills enough and you deserve compensation, or you can just start applying to jobs immediately and kind of get your foot in that door immediately. There are a lot of different ways you can practice your skills. There's things like writing. Maybe you want to write for your campus newspaper. Maybe you want to write for a blog like Science Borealis, which is a Canada-wide blog network for science blogs. Perhaps you want to do public speaking. Maybe you want to do science outreach through organizations like Let's Talk Science or Canadian Association of Girls in Science. So there are a lot of different opportunities, and it can feel overwhelming to kind of decide, where do I go? Which one do I do first? Do I do all the things? Do I do one thing? And really the only advice I can kind of give you here is that it'll come to you as you explore. You'll decide, you'll kind of recognize where your weaknesses are and where your strengths are. And in one case, like with writing, you might decide, I think I'm ready to start pitching and getting paid for my work. And perhaps with graphic design, you might be like, okay, I think I need to go do a course. Maybe I want to do like a master's in biomedical illustration, which is a degree that's offered at University of Toronto's Mississauga campus. Nobody's paying me for this. I'm just mentioning all of those things that I remember. And I just noticed that Ki-Youn has mentioned books, and I actually did bring out the books that I would recommend. So the Science Writer's Essay Handbook is really great if you're kind of interested in long form essays. The Science Writer's Handbook, it's a little old now. It's, I think, 5 or 6 years old, but it's still great. Like, it holds up against time and has a lot of great advice if you're interested in writing. And the last one is kind of recent. It's The Craft of Science Writing from the Open Notebook. It's got a lot of resources, and in general, the Open Notebook is a great place for writing tips and how to get started in science writing. And yeah, the last thing I want to say is a trainee building science communication skills. There's folks out there. They're there on Twitter, they're there at events, workshops, their entire organizations, and you'll find a community to kind of help support you as you explore this, and you're definitely not alone, even if it might feel like that with you in the lab trying to get time away and asking your PI for kind of permission sometimes if you need to.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing all these resources. You'll find that the resources are posted in the chat, so thank you for collecting them and sharing them. I know that you also mentioned that it's important to have a supportive network. So how do you network and build connections in the field of science communication, especially during a pandemic where everything's online? Do you have any tips for how to do that? Farah, I guess we'll start with you.
Pandemic angle. So I graduated with my master's last summer, so summer 2020, when the pandemic was, in full swing, which was a really interesting time to graduate as someone trying to, get a job, those fun things. What really helped was kind of the professional networks and the networking that I had done before the pandemic. So things like volunteering, simply having a Twitter account and just always talking to different people, having those informational interviews. And I know that this sounds like all the same advice that you get at every career panel, but that's the truth. That's what it really is about getting a job. And there's really no secret answer. For me, what it was, I applied to different jobs. I was able to get a research role because of the collaborations I had done in my master's. And even the evidence for democracy role actually happened to work out because I had applied for a job and been rejected, but then they came back to me for future opportunity. So I think it's really about the networking and the volunteering and the people you speak to during your grad degree or your undergraduate degree that's going to help you secure that job, and just being loud and vocal. People aren't going to know that you're looking for a job unless you've mentioned it. People aren't going to know that you're interested in science communication unless you've kind of expressed that passion and you've said, you know what, I'd really like to become a science writer. People are only going to remember you if you speak up, and you are your own advocate at this point. I feel like there's probably a few more things I could say, but Ki-Youn, do you have any suggestions?
You mentioned the job thing because I applied for a volunteer position at my current workplace and I didn't get it, but they pulled my resume for a full-time job instead. And I was like, I'm fine with this. I like money. I like being paid. So I agree. I agree with like everything Farah has said. I know for people, if you feel like you missed out on the networking thing as a grad student or as a student, it can feel a lot more daunting. And I used to see networking as such a greasy thing. And I think it was because I was in pre-med, and a lot of people who networked or tried to suck up to profs were doing it because they were brown nosing. No offense to anyone. So if that's the case, my advice to you is that a lot of the times people are a lot friendlier than you think. People will go so far to help a stranger. It's honestly super surprising to me, even now. And it's funny because I also heard this one podcast where they were saying if someone says no, it's not because you suck or they don't like you. It's just that they just may not have the money or time. So you will probably get no's or no responses when you do cold call. I guess like now we do cold emails and cold messaging. Sorry, I kind of went on a tangent there. I found that the most effective way that I networked once I graduated was by reaching to my existing network. So reaching out to profs at the universities I had attended and saying, hey, this is what I'm doing now. Do you know anyone who might be interested in hiring me for like a small job, or maybe interested in collaborating with the skill sets that I have? And that's how I've gotten almost every single one of my paid gigs and projects. Another really easy way of going about and building relationships is through, this is what I've done. It's not because I'm being paid to say this, because I'm not paid to do any of the stuff I do for the Science Writers and Communicators of Canada, is but joining a professional association that does the work you want to do. It's $35 a year for students, but they have professional development opportunities, and we have regular socials where you get to meet amazing established science writers and communicators across the country. And I think the biggest thing that I want people to remember is that when it comes to finding a mentor in the field, it will take work, just like how making new friends also takes a lot of work. And you have to be putting in just as much effort as, or sometimes even a little more, because mentors tend to be busy, to kind of build up that relationship as well. And I've also managed to find people just through Twitter, because again, English SciComm is quite active on Twitter.
That's really helpful advice. And you've both been in the field for quite some time now. So what do you think would surprise people about what's involved in a SciComm career? Ki-Youn, do you want to answer this one?
A shocking amount of admin. No matter what job you take in science communication, you will have to do admin. Another thing was being prepared for people to not value your skills at all, and to think you're just a glorified secretary, because that happens to me quite often. I think as much as I love science communication, some of the challenges I found in the field has been trying to demonstrate that there is a need in a space for this field, especially during this pandemic. And sometimes trying to get your foot into the door for those specific spaces where you want to close those gaps can be quite challenging. So perseverance and trying to stay as positive as you can is quite important in the field, because it's still a fairly, I wouldn't say it's a new field, because science communication has been around throughout history, but it's more so of a recognized academic field that's newer than something like biology or psychology.
What about you?
What people think is a science communication career might look different from reality. A lot of the one doing a lot of talks, you're the one doing a lot of, like, you're getting a lot of the limelight, but there's a lot of work that goes into it. It's kind of, you have to design your slides, you have to keep up to date on science communication literature, you're always applying for grants, and you always have to hustle hard when there's like a grant deadline coming up, because you're always looking for funding to do what you want. And you're always thinking about collaborators. You're always wondering, who can I partner up with to kind of reach my target audience, or who has the money who can help support a certain science communication initiative that I'm doing. So it's kind of like, it is a bit of an always on mentality. You can't, I think, switch off your brain and just cruise through your career. You always have to be opportunities. And the one thing that I will say is that I feel like I'm cutting out. I hope I'm not cutting out. Versus communication career, which I think is, which I think is difficult. You have to decide, am I going to be a full-time science communicator? Am I going to be doing multiple contract gigs? Am I going to build kind of the life that I want? I ended up going for a mix. I decided to mix up research and science communication, but it comes with its own challenges. I have to kind of handle competing priorities, and I have to decide how to kind of manage my day and go with it. And that might not be suitable for everyone. So I think kind of picturing what a science communication career is easy, but I would always recommend people to kind of do informational interviews and really think deeply about what you're hoping to get out of your life and what you want to do next, and kind of building the life and career that you want. That does feel very vague, but it is so deep.
And so whether you are picking this freelance versus full-time career versus a mix of both, do you have any advice for how to find opportunities or jobs or volunteer opportunities? Ki-Youn, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. Oh no, Farah's internet's cutting out. It's a loaded question. So there is, the question was finding opportunities, freelance, permanent, like a permanent job at an organization, and a combination. Is that correct? Okay. So if you're looking for a permanent position or you want to be an employee at an organization, what I recommend, I hope I don't shatter any dreams here, but positions are not going to be posted as science communication, a science communicator. No one's going to be like, we're looking for a science communicator. Out of the hundreds, if not thousands of job postings I've seen, I think I've seen that twice. And they were positions that were abroad in like Australia, and you got to work with sea creatures. So when you are looking for job postings, the key terms I recommend looking with is communications coordinator, communications manager, and then you have to further look into which organizations are hiring for that specific position. Things also include technical editor, just editor, social media manager, social media coordinator, content creator, marketing coordinator, that's another one. What else is there? Knowledge translation. Knowledge translator is another big one. So those are also, that's a key term if you're really into that. That can also help as well. Video producer is another one. Podcast editor is another one. So it really depends on what you want to go into. And once you look those up, you can further filter through everything based on which organization you would also like to work with. And if you're feeling super keen and there's an organization you really, really want to work with, just reach out to them and be like, hey, these are my skill sets. I would love to work with you guys. Like, could we chat sometime? If they say no, it's not because you're not awesome. It's because they probably don't have the money or the time. And that's often the case for a lot of nonprofits. Kind of going off of what Farah said earlier, a lot of SciComm jobs are not front-facing. I would say a very, very small percentage of them are front-facing, and you will be doing a lot of work that's not SciComm either in your SciComm job. So just giving you a realistic image of that. As for freelancing, again, this kind of comes back to networking. And for people who don't have your network yet, I know it can get a little frustrating because you're like, oh, they're saying that and like networking word again. So if that's the case and you're still in school, I strongly recommend like talking to your department to see if they have a social media account, or if your lab has a social media account, and seeing if they're up for you like creating content, just so that you have something in your portfolio. And the biggest way I've been able to get any of my side gigs and side projects is through asking, again, my old professors or my mentors about different opportunities that may exist. Or if you are active on Twitter or on the internet, there are a lot of little like part-time jobs that pop up and you can apply for those. And that being said, if you are looking into freelancing, I strongly recommend having a portfolio built up so that you can show samples of work. Now, if you want to combine the two, which is what I've done, make sure that your workplace is flexible, and that flex hours and the ability to work outside of your current workplace is something that you negotiate into the job contract before you sign. My workplace, luckily, most of us are working side gigs and side hustles because, again, nonprofit. But I know there are organizations, like if you work a government job, it's a lot harder to do that, especially if you need to take hours out during the day to go do your side hustle. So that's something to keep in mind, and try really hard not to bite off too much that you can chew, because it can get a little overwhelming with a full-time job and also an additional 10 to 20 hours.
Farah, do you have any tips for someone who's looking for opportunities, either in terms of freelance or a full-time career or a mix?
So it does come down to networking, and I know it's hard during and going to conferences, going to events like these held by Raw Talk Podcast. That's where you're going to meet people. Another thing is that connect with them on LinkedIn, connect with them on Twitter, keep in touch via email, chats every now and then. You're never going to, a lot of the jobs that you're looking for aren't advertised openly. They might actually be they might pop up because you're talking to someone or because someone is looking internally and they haven't actually thought of the job, but because you're there and you've positioned yourself, you might be able to get it. I think a lot of people I sometimes call a lot of things that I've done in science communication luck, but it's really been like luck is a combination of when preparation meets opportunity. It's kind of, I've built the portfolio, the opportunity comes knocking. It's like, I'm ready, I have the skills, and I can do. It is down to luck, but you can prepare yourself for when that lucky opportunity comes by. Other than that, it's going to be a lot of job applications. You'll apply for a lot of different things. You'll get ghosted, you'll get rejected, you'll get offers that you feel like you would have said yes to, but in the moment you'll be like, I don't think this is what I want. And that's fine. You might turn down contracts, which are great because they don't feel like a good fit for you, your ideals and your morals. It'll be a journey. Like last year I was ghosted, rejected. I turned down offers that I can't believe I turned down because it would have felt like a dream opportunity when I was a master's student at that point. But in the end, you're going to figure out what's the best fit for you. It might take some time, but you'll find it. I think everyone has to go.
Great. And I know someone in the chat this as well about finding funding or being paid. So what are some challenges that you face in ensuring that you are compensated properly for your work? Farah, do you want to comment on that?
Compensations for your work. Such a lovely question. It's hard. A lot of positions within science communication are unpaid or underpaid, and you don't know what the ideal rates are.
Oh no.
I think it cut out for a bit.
Trade up.
Why don't you answer this?
So there's a lot of hidden knowledge when it comes to science communication payments. I am doing something about this. So
can people still hear me okay? Noor, you've disappeared too.
I can hear you.
What was the question again? I got super distracted by the
That's okay.
sound.
It's about challenges that you face in ensuring that you are being compensated properly for your work.
Okay. This is a question. I think for me, what has worked is being more assertive about what I'm being worth. I think for a lot of us, when you've been going to school for so long, and doing work for free for so long, you start to forget that you should be compensated for everything that you do. So I found that one of my challenges is for freelance stuff. I've been fairly lucky so far. I think maybe it's because the people that often reach out are aware that I don't usually work for free. So I've been lucky so far this year where I haven't had to do any exposure events, thank God. But I have definitely waited 8 months for a check before. And I'm like, hey guys, you're supposed to pay me. And something that I found really useful when it comes to freelance things is that if it's an organization I really want to work with, then I will let them know. I usually charge this amount for a 1-hour workshop for a nonprofit or a university. But this is something I genuinely care about, and I would love to connect with your students. So let me work within your budget. And I did that recently with one university. So I charge about $750 for a 1-hour workshop for science communication. but all they could pay me was $250. And I was like, you know what, that's fine. That's something I can work with. As for permanent positions, or if you're trying to figure out rates, the more information you have, the better equipped you are. So the way I went about kind of learning what the going salaries are for similar positions to what I currently do. So you can look up communications coordinator or communications manager positions on like Glassdoor, for example, and then look into your geographic location, because depending on what city you are, you will be paid more or less. And from there, you can see a breakdown of different salaries across the board. Different organizations will be able to pay you different amounts. So for large organizations, you will see like 65K plus. If you're working for a nonprofit that's a lot smaller and have like 9 people on the team, it'll be closer to 45, 55K. So the salary ranges you'll typically see for communications jobs tend to be around 45 to 65K in Ottawa. For knowledge translation jobs, depending on how big the organization is, I've seen anywhere from 75 to 92K. But again, it depends on who your employer is, and it tends to be a pay scale. Now, I think it's also important, it's like really important to consider the entire package of the job offer if you decide to go it's a little bit more of a stable route where you have a paycheck coming in every 2 weeks. You want to consider the sick days, the vacation days, whether you get health insurance, do they have RSP matching? Do they give you family emergency days? Do they give you flex hours? Are they going to help you set up a home office? Like those are things that would really add up if you were paying for it yourself, but your employer technically takes a small amount out of your paycheck and kind of covers all of that for you. So let's say you do find a job that you really want to do, but they don't necessarily pay you as much as you want, but they have an amazing benefits package. Like there's nothing wrong with taking that offer. Now, if you're trying to figure out things for like freelance rates, always include your admin fees. Either bake it into your hourly rate or add an extra couple hours every single week, because doing all those emails, project management, and updates for information that your client constantly sends you, it is time that you spend. You have to remember you want to charge for the entire package, because when you work in an organization, there is someone who's doing admin for you. There is someone who's doing payroll for you, but you have to do that all on your own as a freelancer. And because you don't get the benefits, the vacation days, or the sick days, it's important to actually increase your hourly rate. So let's go with the 55K a year. That's about $27 an hour, and that includes job security. I normally recommend multiplying by 1.5 because freelancers usually charge more because you have to, because you're doing everything yourself, and employers are familiar with that, and it actually saves them money to hire contractors rather than to pay them with all the benefits. So I found that depending, again, what you're doing, if you're doing social media management and content creation, I've seen hourly rates from $30 to $100 an hour. If you're doing slide deck design, like I've charged $50 an hour to $75 an hour for that. If you're running workshops, you have to consider how many hours you put into building that workshop, because I've spent 75 hours plus on building a 1-hour workshop. So if you're charging like $100 for that 1-hour workshop, you're not even being paid $1 an hour. Like, don't make the mistakes I've made, because I've definitely done a infographic that cost me 80 hours to make, but I was being paid $2 to $3 an hour. And I was like, what is this? So yeah, remember to bake all those things in when you calculate your rates. And also, if you're like, I don't know if the client's going to pay me, give them like a proposal on like how many hours and a breakdown of how long things will take at what step and how much you're charging for those things.
Those are really important points to consider. Farah, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, firstly, I'm going to apologize for audio. I don't know what's happening today. Second thing was, if it comes down to a lot of people in the audience right now, you might be trainees where you're getting kind of single opportunities. It's kind of a one-off workshop, a one-off talk, a one-off panel, and you're trying to decide if the pay is worth it. I find that a useful model is the 4 Ps. So the first P is kind of payment. Are they paying you? Second P is passion. Are you passionate about this particular organization, this particular topic, this particular audience? Another one is prestige. Is doing this going to help you open up doors to a new opportunity? And the last one is community empowerment, the P's in there. And it's whether you're working with the community that you care about. And I usually find like if an opportunity can tick off those 3 P's or for all 4, then that's great. If it doesn't tick them all off, that's fine, but it's going to be a decision that you decide to make on whether to pursue it or not. And when it comes to kind of workshops, talks, and like how to charge, so Ki-Youn has just laid out amazingly like the amount of hours that go in to doing something like this. I will add that 500 Women Scientists is about to launch a survey to crowdsource speaking fees and rates from STEM professionals. It should be out in like the first week of March. And if you've ever done a talk, if you ever received money, fill it out so that we can kind of build this transparent public-facing resource that everyone can use. And I'm not going to try my luck anymore with the Wi-Fi.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. So in the interest of taking up some questions from the audience, we have a question from Atifa who asks, hiring SciComm people look for in a resume, and how can you find SciComm jobs? So I think we talked about the SciComm jobs aspect of this, but what about what people look for on a resume? Do any of you want to comment on that?
First, Farah, because your Wi-Fi is cooperating.
I mean, I've never hired someone for a science communication role. I'm not in a hiring role, but I have applied. What I tend to do is I highlight the skills and the knowledge that I'm bringing. So if it's perhaps a genomics related science communication role, I would highlight, hey, I've done a master's in genomics, and here are the science communication roles that I've done that are relevant. I would definitely focus on a more skills-based approach, so kind of highlighting the different skills that you've developed and why that's an asset. And with cover letters, I found that the more bolder I am, like saying things like, I'm a perfect fit and here is X, Y, Z reasons why. I find that literally being upfront and saying, this is why I'm the perfect fit tends to work better than just saying, I have 10 years of experience in A, B, C, and I would really like this role. But that's just something that I've seen personally for me. And from talking to a lot of other folks, I will say that obviously have a master list of everything that you've done so that you're able to kind of apply to things on like a whim, because sometimes jobs can kind of pop up fast and close fast. So you want to apply sooner rather than later, and you want to apply sooner before you kind of get lost with all the other applications. So having a master list of everything save your life like again and again. Yeah.
That's great advice. We also have a question from Yagnesh, who is asking about, could you please summarize the process of pitching a story and getting paid for it, leading to doing it professionally, and what organizations do you usually target?
I'll let Farah answer that.
So when it comes to pitching, the first step kind of is you figure out what your story is. So is it a story and it's not a topic? You want to distinguish between those two things. If you want to figure out how to pitch a story, like the resources we've mentioned that are in the chat are great spaces, especially the Open Notebooks pitch database. They have actual pitches that journalists have sent, and you can out of their pitch. You'll send off a quick email to an editor, kind of lay out, this is the story, this is why I'm a good fit, keep it very brief, send it off. You might not hear back immediately. Usually if it's a time sensitive one and they really want you to do it, they'll respond. Maybe you'll get kind of hidden within the inbox. You might want to follow up. And if you don't hear back at all, it's kind of time to start pitching other places. Once someone accepts your story, you'll be given a deadline and you'll go off to do your thing. So you'll interview a person, you'll do background research, you'll build it into an engaging story, you'll submit it to the editor, you'll go through editorial review, fact checking at some outlets, and then it'll be published immediately or it'll take a while. I will say that this is kind of the ideal process, but it can look very different for different people. For example, you might choose to write the story first before pitching it. Or maybe you'll start writing it and then the editor says, hold up, we're not going to publish this for another 6 months. for news pieces, you'll move faster. For longer feature pieces, you might take a long time. So it does look very different for different people. In terms of outlets, so there are a lot of great outlets out there. I'll drop a link after this when Ki-Youn takes her time to answer this question too. I will say that there are certain outlets that look for kind of scientists, like they're specifically recruiting for scientists. So they're looking for you and your special expertise. One example is Massive Science. They train scientists to write about science. There's beginner outlets like Lateral Magazine. And then, of course, there's the big ones like the New York Times, Wired. Like, I think a lot of people are scared to shoot their shot, but they're just newspapers, and you can send an email to an editor and pitch your piece. The last thing I will shout out is the Writers Co-op podcast. It's this amazing podcast that really breaks down kind of the whole ins and outs of writing. It's not specific to science writing, even though Wudan does do a lot of science writing. She's one of the hosts. So I would really recommend that podcast and all the resources they've built.
That, Farah. We also have a question from Grace, who's asking what the most rewarding part of science communication is for both of you.
For me, it's when I make something easy for someone. I know people think it's just dumbing it down. Please don't say that. It's so degrading to an audience, but it's when someone just gets it on the first time and you're like, yes, I've done my job. Yeah.
I think that I do love it when you can kind of see it in people's eyes when it clicks and they've kind of gotten it. That's just such a lovely feeling. But I will say another fun part is when you see science communication being appreciated in academia. I think that just warms my heart also, my very cold, barren heart at some points. For example, I recently submitted this review. It was an academic review about kind of the progress in epilepsy genetics. And one of the comments that came out from one of the peer reviewers was like, this was really clearly written. And I was just like, yes, thank you. All those years of science writing are paying off. So yeah, I think those are kind of some of the feelings that help keep it going on the tough times.
I also have a question from Connor, who's asking Ki-Youn, if you are being paid by a client or employer, is it something like a tech medical company trying to raise awareness about their product service? Or is it a larger that gets large government grants and hires people for large SciComm programs?
I don't know if there are large SciComm companies in Canada. I know NEBA Communications is one that actually does science communication, but they mostly work with government clients. Again, it really depends. If you are being paid by a private company, it may be they just need your expertise as a consultant or content production. So it'll depend on what they are asking you to do. It may be that they want to sell a product or provide a service and they're not the best at communicating that to their target audience, or it could be that it could be like an outreach event that they're hosting. Like private companies will often sponsor a lot of outreach events that align with their vision and their mission statement. It also gives them positive publicity. I know a lot of the SciComm initiatives in Canada, however, are reliant heavily on government grants and on universities kind of giving a little bit of money to whoever is running the event. I personally would like to see us go a little more private sector because that means we'll actually have more money to do really cool things. But I know scientists and a lot of people, especially like science writers, get very iffy about sponsorship money. And even though that's our most viable, it's like one of the most viable ways, because like, again, podcasting, you rely heavily on sponsorships. Anything that involves free content needs someone to pay. So yeah.
I guess a follow-up to that is Let's Talk Science. Does that count as a larger SciComm company?
They're nonprofit. It's a nonprofit outreach organization.
And they are heavily reliant on government
Government
sources.
grants. Yeah.
Great. All right, so I think we're out of time right now. Thank you so much for questions. For people who have more questions, feel free to join the discussion chats that are happening later today so you can talk about whatever it is that you want to talk about. And thank you so much for the guests for joining us on a Sunday. Thank you for sharing all your insights, resources as well. So,
Hi.
bye.